Okay, great. So we are recording this situation. Again, my name is Novo Mana from Collective HR Solutions, and this is the Technology Review Council. Again, we appreciate your attendance. It makes our lives interesting to have a crowd of people live watching and listening and also asking our vendors questions. And I'm very, very pleased to introduce Bruce Marble, whose birthday it is today. We won't extend too much on that one, but nonetheless, happy birthday. I will be uh, monitoring the chat, so if you have some questions, please either raise your hand or pop it in the chat, and I'll make sure that Bruce will be able to answer our questions. But Bruce, if you'd be kind enough to just simply introduce yourself and employee cycle. I was very thrilled when you demonstrated for me. I think that'll be an interesting group to and product, if you will, and solution to demo for our group too. So go for
Okay.
it.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for attending this. No, thank you so much for having me and Employee Cycle here. We really appreciate it. And we're so thankful and honored for everyone to be spending half an hour with us to learn more about Employee Cycle, to learn more about the work that we're doing. We're all about helping HR leaders become data-driven superheroes. We know that historically, a lot of HR leaders have not had the opportunity to be able to use data in the way that you want to. And so our goal is to change that so that across all organizations, the perception, whether people think of HR as however they think of it, maybe sometimes people call HR in a call center, sometimes people look at HR as, oh, this is the police or this is the department that we absolutely have to have. But our goal is to help HR leaders use data so that you really become a people success team and that HR becomes the most data driven department in an organization. So, with that being said, Nov, should we kick it off?
Absolutely, go for it.
All right. And just to confirm, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
All right. So, to formally introduce myself again, I'm Bruce Marable, CEO of Employee Cycle. We're an HR analytics dashboard. Our goal is to help HR leaders and organizations answer your workforce questions very easily from one place. So, just to give you some context about why we do this and why I started the company with my co founder and our team. Years ago, I had co founded an applicant tracking system. That ATS ended up being acquired and merged into another onboarding platform. And throughout that entire experience, I kept having HR leaders come to me and say, Bruce, this is awesome that you've been able to merge and consolidate two pieces of my HR tech stack. But quite honestly, I still have performance, engagement, Ben admin, and all these other modules that are totally separate systems, and I didn't get into HR to build pivot tables. I got into HR to help the workforce thrive. And now I'm finding that all of my time is being spent pulling spreadsheets from either one or multiple systems to be able to become data driven and fulfill the data needs of my executive team. Yet I'm still not able to really provide the insights and or provide the data in an organized way that I would like for it to be. And so years ago, we said, you know what? There were two different paths that we could take. We could either try to build a full-blown HRIS system, which I thought was just completely insane, or what we could do is let the HRIS systems and ATS systems and all the other systems be great as full solutions that lack reporting or point solutions that create data silos. And how about we just tap into those APIs to be able to bring that data so that you have one centralized source of truth. And so here we are doing that, providing Employee Cycle to a lot of HR leaders, allowing you to view, share, track, and analyze all your people data in one place. So let's talk about the problem, excuse me, that we typically see across most HR leaders that we talk to. We find that most of you fall into one, if not all four of these operational issues. Those typically include lacking time and data skills, maybe some outdated reporting, a lot of messy spreadsheets, or you have the data, but you spend most of the time spending trying to make the data visually compelling, but maybe your team doesn't have enough time or the bandwidth to be able to tell a data driven and compelling story and narrative around that data. And then from a technological standpoint, we find a lot of HR leaders either having one or multiple systems in the HR tech stack, creating these data silos, trying to pull this data together. And for a lot of HR leaders, we find a lot of frustration. It's tedious, it's time consuming, and it's very manual. And so, what we decided to do is to look at what we call the most typical HR data journey that we usually see across most organizations. And so these 5 pillars are typically what we find represent the HR data journey. Now, all of you may have different nuances within these different sections of the data journey, but we find that this typically is the foundation of how HR leaders need to and want to use data to make smarter decisions. And so it always starts off with the data sources. Where's the data coming from? Am I using a system? Am I using multiple systems? Am I using multiple systems and or spreadsheets? What does that look like? The next stage is all around data quality. Here, this is where we find most HR leaders looking at their data, trying to understand, do you have a high enough level of data integrity? Do you have data completion? Do you have a lot of duplicates? What's going on with the data? So for instance, we see a lot of HR leaders plugging their data in their HRIS system into our dashboard and reporting platform. And they'll say something like, oh, employee cycle. We realized that when we looked at a DEI pie chart, we knew that we had a lot more women or a lot more people of color at our organization. You must be pulling the data incorrectly. But then we'll say, did you check the data quality? And then they'll look and say, oh, wow, we didn't realize that less than 30 or 40% of our employees had actually filled out the ethnicity field. And so we find that and we understand that data quality is becoming more and more of a mission critical piece as more people are hired in the HRIS role and now able to actually make sure that that is as complete as possible. The next stage that we find most HR leaders going through is the data visualization and reporting. Now, this is very important because you don't just want to give raw data, typically row level data, although that's what we see a lot, row level reports, because that's typically the way that the HRIS system spits the data out. And or that's typically the way that most HR leaders are able to present the data. But what we find is that a lot of people who are responsible for making this data visually compelling are spending a lot of time trying to understand, how do I create bar charts, pie graphs, maps? Maybe if I'm feeling dangerous, I'll create a pivot table. For all of you out there who actually like creating pivot tables, that's awesome. But we find that most HR leaders can't even wrap their head, nor do we believe that you even need to, because we believe that that should be automated. So we find that most of the time is spent here in this data visualization and reporting. And unfortunately, because most of the time is spent here, this really suffers the data analysis. And quite frankly, yeah, there's times where you just need a KPI or you just need a quick glimpse into a very standard report or dashboard. But the real beauty of using data is to try to really understand and analyze what's going on with this different piece of data. How does this translate into some type of actionable insight? And ultimately, how does this really link to the impact of the business? But we find, because most HR leaders are spending their time here around data visualization and making the data compelling so it looks as good as the marketing dashboards or the other dashboards from other departments, this typically suffers. And so you get in this cycle of tearing, making the data visually compelling, skipping analysis, and going right to data presentation, which typically we find as a PowerPoint. And so across this data journey here, data sources, data quality, data viz, analysis, and data sharing, our job is to automate as much of this as possible so that we can give you time back to do all the more human things that we believe really HR leaders should be doing, and allow you to level up so that all the things that can be automated can still be automated, and you can really spend your time on the more strategic things that only a person can do. So before I actually go into the product, does anybody have any questions so far?
Funny thing you should ask that, Bruce. Yes, we do. Bobby is asking, and so this is an interesting chart because I fell in love with this. This was the first one you presented to me, and I said, okay,
Yeah.
we're done. This is it. So Bobby says, don't you want to change the position of data visualization and analysis? In other words, shouldn't you be able to analyze first before you visualize? In all honesty, what I'll give you my 2 cents here. I think you have the chart correct. A lot of people just grab the data and just start to show graphics and stories and so on. And to your point, and we had a little bit of talk about that, if I'm not generating a question when I do a visualization, then I'm not doing it right, because every time I show a stat, I probably have something else behind it that says, oh, well, what about this? And what about, so I think you're right. I think data analysis is part of the things that suffer in this process. But I want to respect that Bobby, as a friend, has asked that question. So let me ask you what you have to say about that.
Sure, Bobby. So just to confirm the question, your question is, should analysis come before data visualization? The reason why we believe data visualization should come first, and that's also why we believe it should be automated. Let me take a step back. If it needs to be done manually, then there may be an argument for the analysis to be done first. But if you're using a solution like Employee Cycle, then we believe we're actually accelerating your entire HR data journey to get you to the point where you can actually do the analysis and get to the point where you even want to do the analysis or know what you even want to analyze in a fraction of the time than it would take for you to try to explore and then visualize. And so what I mean is, if you're able to create different charts and graphs at just a click of a button and just really at your fingertips to be able to explore the data, because we look at data exploration and analysis a little differently. Data visualization to us is more about the data exploration. I just want to see if in fact there are trends that I should even further analyze. And so if I'm looking at a turnover chart, well, that's a form of data visualization. It may be super basic, but just looking at that trend line to see whether turnover is going up or down allows me to understand whether or not this is something I should be looking at. If it's flat, then maybe your organization doesn't care. If there was a specific inflection point where it peaked and then it went down, or it peaked and then it went, or it stopped and then it went up, now I know, okay, I want to look at that time from when it started to go up until today. And now I want to understand which specific cohort of employees is further impacting that. So then that's where the analysis starts to come in. I'm saying, okay, is that a women or female population? Is that a population of people of color? Or is that a population of people at certain levels, generations, age, tenure? But I wouldn't have even known where to start analyzing until I actually had that chart. Does that make any sense?
Not
Or does
only
that?
that, that whole process, Bruce, I knew it was going to start a conversation. In all honesty, I would say that some of the questions that I think are being asked here will probably be shown better when we get to the demo. But I do want to, so a couple of things back and forth, but how do you merge the data sources, and do you have a standard HR data model? And the answer is you can show that in the demo and talk to that. What Bobby's saying is, what are we visualizing? Just raw data. I think to your point, and maybe to kind of put this in the context, I'll let you go to the demo, that normally people will create a report. You know, give
Yes.
me all the people who left. You know, show me
Yes.
that, and let me compare that to a number of the people that you know are still here or whatever. To your point, it's just presenting data in a very, and I hate to say it, but Bobby, I think you're correct. It's raw data. It has not really been analyzed as to the causes, the impacts of what's happening. All I'm showing is this happened, but what was the cause of it? Where did it come from? And are there many factors behind that? You know, we had a change of management, we changed locations, COVID hit, whatever the case may be, you need to be able to analyze. And I think that's really the discerning part between what you're saying. Showing it as a chart or something is one thing. Truly getting into the depths of what caused this and how do I zero in on one or multiple factors I need to take into consideration to take this apart and solve it, or propagate it, depending on positive or negative. That's really what you're talking about in that data analysis. So I think we'll probably get a better appreciation for what you've done with this when we get to the demo. But I just want to say you've got a long list of questions out here. We'll go back and revisit them as well. But please go ahead.
Awesome. Okay. All right. So I just want to make sure I'm sharing my full window here. Did you see me change over to the product?
Yes. Well, we're seeing the integrations.
Oh,
Yeah,
perfect. Okay. All right. So what I'm going to do, and I don't have Teams up on a different screen. And so, Nova, if you can help me with
sure.
questions as they come through, please just interject. We'll
Will
love to
do.
answer them in real time. But what I'm going to do is show our product based off of the different stages in the HR data journey. And so the first area of the HR data journey is data sources. And so what we've done is we've built integrations to a lot of the most popular HRIS, ATS, and performance systems to be able to automatically bring in your data. And because we've already mapped all of the endpoints from the different API integrations that we have, 90 to 95% of the data will automatically come in the way that it's supposed to be, because we're not an agnostic analytic solution where we're mapping it custom every time. So we're not a Power BI or any other system, and then we're saying, hey, you could use this for HR. We're specifically and purpose built for HR data, which allows us to pre-populate all of this data and then build across what other systems what need or what they would call to be custom. It's automatically out of the box for us. And so let's just say if you were using UKG, for instance, because we're a UKG marketplace partner, we have a pre-built integration connector. We would just walk you through this process, which would take 5 minutes. And then once this happens, now this isn't full implementation, but just to get your data in to Employee Cycle, this is all you would do. Fill this out. We would walk you through the process. Again, it would take 5 minutes. Within 15 minutes, we start populating the data, and then you'll be able to see it across all of the parameters and endpoints of the API. Now, implementation is a different thing where we would bring in your custom fields. We would map all of your different org levels. If you have component companies or different EINs, we would do mapping in the back end for you. But again, for 90 to 95% of all the data in those standard fields, that's automatically coming over. And so what happens? Oh, is that a question?
There was a very quick one, and that is that Roy had asked this question: how do you merge these sources? Do you have a data model where you're normalizing the different sources? If let's say I had uh, Rippling and UKG side by side for some odd reason, and I want to bring these all together, are you normalizing that into a data model that's called, name and
Yes,
position, etc.? Okay,
yes, yes. So to give you an example, we have a customer. We're getting more and more customers from Europe because systems like Bamboo HR are just expanding like wildfire. And so what's happening is that sometimes a customer will use Bamboo HR for their global HRIS, but then they'll also use a different US payroll system. Sometimes they are able to blend that data together. Other times it's a manual process, and so they can't integrate. So right now we have a customer that has Bamboo for Europe, they have Paylocity for the US, and they even have two different Paylocity accounts because it's two different EINs. They're a manufacturing company. And so really they're three different companies, two in the US, one in Europe. And so we connected both of their Paylocity accounts and their Bamboo account, pulled it all together, and it just blends right together because we're mapping all of this normalized data across all the different HRIS systems into one database that's then coming back and then being visualized on the front end. Did that answer your question?
I think the answer would be yes. Roy did. I'll leave it to Roy to unmute if he needs further
Yes, it did.
clarification.
Thank you.
Please. Oh, okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So then once this data is normalized and brought in through our data ingester, from here, what we're doing is we're giving you these out-of-the-box dashboards. Now, I'll go to the dashboards in a second because I want to stay true to the HR data journey. And so the first thing that we want you to do so that we don't get into this back and forth of you think things are off, but we know that you have incomplete employee fields or records, we first want you to go into our data quality audit. And so we all know the cliche statement, garbage in, garbage out, but we know that a lot of platforms aren't really doing anything about making sure that there is no garbage, or at least the most limited amount of garbage in the data. And so what we're doing here is two things. One, we're helping you understand what is the completion rate across all the different standard fields, and we can bring in custom fields if necessary, but usually those are optional, so most companies don't really worry about them on the data quality. But all of your standard fields, looking to see if in fact you have 100% completion. If you have less than 100% completion, then we're actually showing you what is that completion rate. We're giving you an aggregated view of that data quality completion, and then from here we're giving you a list of all of the employees in the missing fields. Two things can happen here. You can either, one, decide that some of this data that we're missing is mission critical. So let's just say, for instance, you're missing location or you're missing ethnicity. You might want to go clean that up. Or we have certain instances where companies will say, so for instance, the example that I gave with the company using Bamboo in Europe, they track DEI totally differently in Europe and a lot of other places than we do in the US. And so we get companies that don't even track DEI globally. And so for them, if it came up as incomplete, they're not worried about it. And so for them, it's not even something that they want to fix. So you can decide, hey, I'll fix it, or I'll fix it later, or I don't even worry about it at all because it's just not that important. And one thing that I don't know if I mentioned is that our ingester is running every 4 hours. And so as you see this data quality, if you were to update this 9 a.m., by 1 p.m., this would have already updated again, and you would now see that you wouldn't see any of those missing fields because you would have completed them all. Before I go to the next step, any questions so far?
I'm not hearing all the applause I think would come out of this process. Yeah, there we go.
Okay.
No,
Again,
this is key. This is, like you say, a lot of people do the conversion.
yep.
In all honesty, quick question for the purposes of, am I taking history as well in any sense, or is this all current data? And because a lot of historical reporting is used for analysis.
Great question. So we do bring in the transactional level data for certain systems. So for instance, systems like UKG, we bring in the transactional history. Other systems, depending on what happens or if we can even pull in history, then we can bring that in. But for certain systems, especially the larger ones with larger companies and headcounts, absolutely.
Great. Okay, thank you.
All right. So then the next thing we're going to is the data visualization. And so what we're doing here is giving you a taste of what the world could be, because we work with a lot of different HR leaders on a totally different spectrum. And so if I look at the two different spectrums of HR leaders, you have those all the way over to the left that barely can use data, never interacted with data, really struggling to trying to figure out why should I even use data, all the way over here to where we're even playing around with AI, ML, and predictive analytics, which we find to be a very small cohort. And then the rest of the HR community is somewhere in between. And usually it's to the point where maybe we have some dashboards, maybe we have turned some of these into dashboards that we share, maybe we tried to use Power BI, but we still are working on what is even a template that we should be using. And so for us, we said, well, we don't necessarily want to tell you here are 1,000 different metrics you should be looking at, but at least give you a starting point so that you can have a foundation of metrics and then build the rest from there. And so that's why we have these templates here. You can either start from scratch or you can start from a template. And so I'll build a headcount dashboard. I'll call this TRC headcount, and then we'll create dashboard. And so as I was mentioning earlier, because this is already mapped to all of the different endpoints from the API, all of this data is just flowing in once we pull it in from our first ingest. And so what you're looking at here are just some very basic standard best practice metrics that we believe HR leaders typically are looking at and should be looking at when it comes to headcount. Now you can build a lot more metrics, which I'm going to show you in a few minutes, but we just want to start you off with something so that you can see the chart types, you can see what they look like in general and how you can interact with them, and you can start playing around with them to really get the look and feel of the product before you even build any other custom metrics. And so some of those things include basic things like renaming metrics, drag and drop the metrics to reorder the data story and arc and narrative of how you want to tell this story, view in full screen for presentation mode. But most importantly, one of the things that we really are looking to do is to change the narrative and really change the way that HR leaders think about reports and dashboards as totally separate things. Because everyone on here seems pretty data driven, data savvy, and so we all know that from a foundational level, a visualization is nothing more, or a metric and a chart on a dashboard is nothing more than a visualized report. And so why shouldn't you be able to look at the dashboard view, look at the metric view, and then just drill down to the spreadsheet? Internally, we're always joking saying that we're trying to get rid of spreadsheets 100% from HR leaders, but we know for 100 different reasons, HR just still needs a good old spreadsheet for whatever reason. And so that's why you can also download the employee view here. And so outside of here, oh, no, was that a question?
I was going to ask a very quick question. So when you talk about this ingesting of the data, am I bringing and showing a delta from the last ingestion or building from scratch? In other words, am I going out and rebuilding the database each time?
So this is almost as real time as it gets. And so if I'm understanding your question correctly, you don't have to refresh yourself. It automatically refresh.
Okay, so it's constantly bringing that data in, like I said, every 4 hours, refreshing, and so that, okay. How do I keep a static view of what I was reporting on before? I go to lunch and come back and, oh my God, the data changed. Kiddingly, but nonetheless, how can I keep a static view of what I was analyzing previously?
Yes, and so I'm going to actually skip to the metrics to show you how you would do that. So we believe we built the most powerful yet easiest to use metric report builder in the market. I don't know how many of you either play with Mad Libs or remember Mad Libs as a kid where you had to fill in the blank in the poems, but we jokingly like to call this Mad Libs metrics internally. But a more straightforward way to explain this is fill in the blank metrics. And so the way it works is I want to see blank data. And so let's just say if I want to see headcount, we'll just keep it simple for now, but then we'll make it more advanced. I just want to answer Nove's question. If I want to look at headcount, and then I want to look at it over time. So I could say time, and then I can either create custom date ranges, or I can just choose from any of the pre-selected date ranges here. Let's just say year to date. And then I can choose whether I want an increments of day, month, year, increments of month, view metric. Excuse me. Just that easily, I was able to create this year-to-date metric of my headcount over this time. Excuse me. And so once I get to save this metric, this checkbox here is answering your question, Nove.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that when HR leaders are reporting on the data, there's two different ways that you typically are reporting when it comes to date ranges. You either need some type of date range, which usually is quarterly. And so maybe you need a Q1 report. So let's just say if you're on a calendar year, you don't want your report, or let's just say Q2, since we're in August, you don't want your Q2 report to bring up data from August because Q2 ended June 30th.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you were to set this year to date and it was June 30th, then you would uncheck this box. And that means that it's going to stay static for that date range. But if you check the box, excuse me, it's evergreen. And so it's always updating.
Gotcha.
And then just to show you how this would work, yeah, of course, we would go to our TRC headcount dashboard. Maybe we would call this TRC or headcount all TRC. We click save. And that's how you add it to a dashboard.
Very easy.
So I'll go back to find metrics just to show you really how powerful this is and how user-friendly and easy it is to be able to pick up with almost no learning curve. And so the first area that you're seeing here, these are the different types of data that you can look at. And so if you want to see headcount data, hire data, departures, turnover, total salary, jobs posted, whatever type of data set that you want to manage, that's what you start off with. And so let's just say if we wanted to see higher data. And again, let's choose time. I'll go to the other types shortly. We choose time, we choose year to date, and then we choose month. And then from here, we view metric. Very basic metric. But I think it was Bobby that was asking a question about visualization. And so here, or visualization versus analysis, which one should go first? So this is why we believe that the visualization should go first. Because what we want to see here is, why did this drop happen? Well, all data typically, or all insights, they usually happen from a little bit of gut and then hopefully a lot of data. Because it's very hard for you to just dive into the data and truly find the problem without really having any type of gut feeling or insight into why this should be. So you got to have some type of hypothesis. So maybe you believe that there's something going on with women leaving, or there's something going on with a certain tenure group leaving, or there's something going on with a lot of people from a certain location leaving, or maybe we didn't hire a lot of people because we closed down a location. And so what happened there? So what we can do is we can use this compare function, and we could say, I want to compare all of the employees that we hired over time against just women. And then I will, my Teams thing is in the way of the button. Hopefully I can, wow, oh, there it is, okay.
Yeah.
All right, so let's apply, and then let's view metric, and here we are. So just that easily, we now were able to go from a data visualization or a chart to now we can start analyzing if in fact our number of women that we hired is actually on the same trajectory, or if women actually were totally different. If this line would have drooped here, we could have said, wait a minute, why were we hiring so many less women slower, on a slower pace than we were actually doing for our entire hiring group? Or what we could do is, maybe there was a certain department that we thought maybe had something weird hiring, or they closed down. Maybe we let go a lot of people in CS, or maybe we had a lot less customers. Therefore, we thought that we had to get rid of people in customer support. And so you can just compare just against the customer support department, and then view metric, and start to see if in fact customer support is a culprit. But then when you look, you say, you know what? Customer support was actually a little bit more flat than the trend for women and the trend for total headcount. So maybe customer support wasn't really a big factor in regards to why our hiring went down. And you can do this for a lot of other areas too. And so one of the common use cases that we find here a lot is looking at hiring for DEI. And so if you look at hire, and then you go into time, year to date, increments of month, and then maybe we want to just look at, what does this look like against for white employees, against employees who are Black or African American, also compared with employees that are Asian.
What you just represented about 6 months worth of work for somebody to figure out those 3 reports.
Yes. Excuse me. Exactly.
Very cool. Very
and
cool.
So here you're now able to see, oh, why are there big gaps here? And then from here, based off of your organization and anything that you already have, any context you have, because someone has to have some general context about what's going on in your business, you then say, okay, maybe I can start connecting the dots between why we hire less people from this ethnicity versus this gender versus this tenure, and why is all of this happening? And again, we make it super simple so that you don't have to worry about limiting your insight, because we find that because it takes so long to visualize the data, that you either, we found a lot of HR leaders try to prematurely find an insight because it's too hard to visualize all these different cohorts of data, or they'll just stop and say, you know what, I don't have time to create all these charts, and so maybe I'm just not going to get the real insight to this problem. But if you have it at the tip of your fingers where you can just play around with it and just create an infinite number of calculations or infinite number of trends, then this should hopefully help you support you to get to a better outcome. So I'll quickly show you, excuse
Bruce,
me.
this is
Oh,
no, just a very quick one. So Bobby was asking the question, who defines the fields and the data sets? Is that coming from you or is that your client?
great question. And so we're pulling directly from, in this case, your HRIS. But we do have the ability to rename your standard fields and your custom fields. And so we get a lot of HR leaders that are frustrated with the way that the finance team organize the HR data, because the HR data in the HRIS systems are typically organized based off of cost structure and how the finance team wants it organized. But the HR team knows that the actual company doesn't operate that way from an employee perspective. And so they'll ask us to rename business units or rename divisions based off what everybody really calls it versus the name that they're calling it inside the HRIS system just for finance purposes.
Could I potentially use your system in this process to start a data governance type of, I guess, project to standardize the data so that we are all talking the same values, same data,
Oh,
you know,
yes,
that kind
yes. Oh, absolutely. And so two things typically happen at the very beginning. Actually three, but two really main things happen every time we work with a new company. One, they realize that they weren't missing, they realize that they're missing more data than they thought they were missing. But then two, they realize that the naming conventions that were set up across areas that they didn't even realize were set up that way because they never had anyone responsible for analyzing it, was just not set up the way that they wanted it to. And so we've had customers that look at their ethnicity fields and say, wow, that's semi-biased, borderline racist, weird. Who set that up that way? Okay, we're not going to use those names. They're totally outdated. Their legacy. We need to change this. Or we have customers that will look at the different business units, as I mentioned, and say, okay, this clearly was a finance thing. Or they'll realize that we'll have new HR leaders that a system could actually organize their employees by level. And so they realize that they can't actually view level. So then they start changing the names of the roles only in employee cycle. So that we say manager 2, manager 3, and they'll add it there so that they can group those together to actually look at levels because their HRIS system doesn't support levels. So we see a lot of different use cases for why you want to rename the data fields, which they may not call it data governance, but that's basically what they're doing.
So Rose has asked a quick question here, and it was a very good one. It says, does the system have the way an ability to suggest what kind of a visual graph to use, or does the user have to choose that?
Can you ask that question again, Nov?
Yeah, I'm probably not stating it quite as eloquently as Rose was asking. So let's say, so it says, I may have missed this, but does the system have the ability to suggest what type of visual graph to use, or does this user have to choose that? Sometimes someone may use, and my window just closed there. Sometimes someone may use the wrong type of graph to display the data, which make it hard to interpret.
Wow. Okay. So I love this question because our team of engineers and analysts, they are hardcore data people, as you would imagine, building a product like this. And we've had some some really interesting internal debates about things like pie charts, for instance. Pie charts have been very heated discussions inside the walls of employee cycle. We now have pie charts, as you saw, but for a while we didn't because our data team was just against pie charts for various reasons. I don't know if anyone here had strong opinions on pie charts, but hardcore data people do not like pie charts, which they were invented, don't like people using them. Meanwhile, almost every HR leader we work with loves pie charts. And so to keep customers happy, but also to, in my non-hardcore data-driven, non-technical way, I think that some things do look better in pie charts. And so to answer your question, what we've done is we do have standard ways for how we believe charts should look. And so for instance, this headcount by location, by default, it comes up as a bar chart, but you get the option to be able to edit and then change it to a pie chart.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. I think Bruce,
that was funny.
Yeah, it gives you some variability. I'm going to save one question for the end of this because I think it's your roadmap system. But what you were showing in the ability to grab data and start doing comparatives around, let's say, overall hiring versus maybe ethnicities or so on.
Yep.
Does AI fit into this situation, and are you experimenting with that?
Great question. We are experimenting with AI, but we're being extremely careful, maybe even overly careful, but I don't even know if there's an overly careful with AI, with so many data leaks and and then creating so much bias. And there's already so much inherent bias in the workforce to begin with. Then when you pull something that already drives a lot of bias, because if the foundation of the models when you're using AI or even slightly biased, then when you use AI to do things like predictive, then it becomes exponentially more biased or exponentially more incorrect. And so we do have areas where we're looking at AI for insights for sure, and could be late this year, early next year. But we are making sure that the way that we're using it is has the least amount of bias in it, and also I'll use the word the most realistic possible, because we've seen a lot of platforms use AI that's, one, not really AI, but then two, truly use AI but doing things that don't really make sense for AI, or they're just throwing AI in because just that's the buzzword and they believe everybody's going to buy whatever has AI in it. So that was a long way of probably overly explaining why we don't have AI today, but it definitely is on the roadmap. But to be totally honest, and I would love to get feedback from the group, we're finding that out of all the departments, HR seems to be the least impressed with AI, which is super surprising to me. And so that's impacted our roadmap to do other things like people movement and other things that we think are much more important than actually using AI to solve things. There's so the surface area of manual tasks that HR leaders are doing, most of them don't even require AI. And so first and foremost, we want to make sure that before we're trying to predict all this stuff, that we can actually get most HR leaders out of spreadsheets.
Yep. So there's a question here, and let me give it. Jen asked the question, and I was going to ask a little bit along those same lines. Can you turn off row level data, and can you modify the fiscal year? Let's say, for an example, April to March. So the question, I'll put it in conjunction with what Jen has asked. How do I import my security parameters from my HR system into this, or do I have to reset that up here?
Great question. We literally just had this question today from a prospect. Today, we don't have the ability to be able to mirror the permissions from your HRIS, but we do have the ability, especially with single sign-on, and I want to answer both of these questions at the same time, to be able to give different levels of permission so that, actually, here, I'll just show you. And so let's look at this person, Krista Cheney here. Right now, she's an admin. But what we can do is we can actually make Krista an analyst. And from here, we can actually turn off the list. And so the list is the row level data. And so if you don't want Krista to see row level data, but you only want Krista to be able to log in and see metrics, then, or actually it would be this way, then you would turn on the metrics, but leave the list off.
Gotcha.
And
So
then
you
by
do
the
have some control on that, but you do have to build that within your system and not importing, let's say, the Active Directory situation or whatever.
correct.
Okay.
And then
Okay.
what we also allow you to do, and we can help you set up during implementation, is actually set up permission by dashboard. And so the way that that would work is we would, let's just say we create this TRC dashboard. Actually, let me go back. We have this TRC dashboard, and let's just say that the TRC headcount dashboard is the template that we want to use to give every division leader or every location leader. And so we would just simply copy this. We title this for sales, duplicate, and then from here, we could filter by sales. And then
They
once
only
we
get to see that. Gotcha.
would only see this. And so the way that it
Yeah.
would work is with SSO, everybody who has a dashboard share, they click into the SSO, and then this is all they see. And so if your CEO was shared 5 dashboards, then they have 5 listed here. If your CEO has 1 dashboard, they have 1 here. Or if your division leader was only supposed to get 1, they would have 1. So I just want to show you 2 more things, and then we'll love to open it up for questions.
Sure.
So I know we talked about time metrics first, and I just want to show you the way that this works for category. And so time is for trending over time. Category is for seeing like one specific point in time, understanding all the different population filters across your organization. So let's just say we go headcount, category, and then we want to see department. That's a simple one. And we want to see how many people we have per department today. So we view metric. But then if we want to see this by location, you would just change it. And if we want to see this by ethnicity, and you can see here that very quickly, you can just create all these different metrics. Here's a metric to show all your employees by generation. And then here's another metric by age group. Or here's another metric by tenure group. Now, as you're creating these, the compare works the same way here. And so let's just say if we wanted to see generation, and then we wanted to see, well, what does this look like across gender? So how many people by generation do we have total versus female versus employees that are identifying as non-binary or gender neutral or prefer not to say? And then you view metric, and now you get to see very quickly and easily by generation how many employees you have total versus how many employees you have identify as female versus how many employees you have identify as non-binary. And then from here, you can just save it to the dashboard. And then the last metric is just a single KPI. So if I want to see how many people we have, single value as of today, view metric, view.
Gotcha.
And so just to go across our HR data journey, we started off with data sources. We then went into data quality. From there, we went into data visualization, data analysis, and then the last part is presentation. And so from a presentation standpoint, we found a lot of HR leaders taking screenshots of our different metrics and or exporting the different metrics into images and then putting them into PowerPoint. Anytime we see our customers doing something over and over again manually, we know it's time for us to build a feature. And so what you can do here is just simply create a dashboard, export the PowerPoint, and I'm going to show you what a dashboard would look like. And so we are on Teams, and I'm going to share a new screen.
That's always a challenge in its own right.
Yep.
While you're doing that, Bruce, I'm going to say that you had a nice little healthy discussion over here on AI. I think, in all honesty, I have to give this some consideration, but for those of us in the audience and maybe people who will view this later, maybe we ought to invite Bruce back and maybe have a small panel about AI in the world of HR from a technical perspective and a vendor's perspective. what really makes I like the fact that I'm not even sure who said that, but my apologies. It said it isn't AI, it's information, it's IA, information automation, which I think was a very clever way to put. I think
Yes.
we'd have a very healthy discussion with you and maybe a couple others who are really carefully understanding the value versus the considerations, if you will.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
anyway, I didn't mean to take you away from there, but they said no good time on no dead time on the air. So
No worries, no worries. And so hopefully I did this correctly. Are you seeing a PowerPoint?
yes, we are, and it
Great.
looks good.
So the way that this works is we automatically transform and export your dashboard into a PowerPoint so that every image is its own slide. And then from here, you can go in and type in whatever type of context you want, really helping you automate this full circle.
Becomes the board presentation instead
Correct.
of perfect. Very, very nice.
Yes.
I do want to honor any questions and observe. Bruce, you asked a question, and I think I'd love to give you some feedback, but I want to ask the group, do you have some feedback or questions for Bruce at this point? We've got about roughly 6 minutes left before the hour, and then I do want to ask a very quick question. But um, anybody want to raise their hand or open their mic, and please feel free to ask about it. You got a nice compliment from Roy, which is always a very nice thing. He's a well-respected gentleman in our crowd here and a
Thank
friend,
you.
but he doesn't pay me for that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, Michelle, I'd love to read what you've got here, but I'd let you open up your mic if you want to go ahead and just give Bruce the honest perspective.
Yeah, no, thanks. I was just saying that, this looks like a great tool. So definitely looking forward to follow you guys on your journey. And I think it has the potential to support an overall data analytics strategy. I think you talked about it earlier, like the underlying data needs to be there. But yeah, it's just making it easier for some people that don't necessarily have a skill set to pull the data together and to analyze it. Just makes their job a lot easier. I had asked a question earlier on, and you may have already answered it and I missed it, but is this really focused on pulling together HR related data, or is it also, can you bring in business data?
Great question. We're on the fence about that for a couple of different reasons. We're trying to figure out how, if, when we want to do that. We're finding that there's a small cohort of very advanced HR people analytics leaders that want to do true people analytics, bringing in data from multiple places, really looking at business data through the lens of HR. But then we're finding that most HR leaders in the market today are really just trying to understand what is going on with their own HR data. And so it's always this going deep versus going wide, because if we go wide, then one of the things we don't want to do is that it just seems like now we're just a general analytics solution versus actually being for HR. And there's always more and more HR needs that we solve that we even have time or bandwidth to solve. And so the long answer to that is no, not today, but as we continue to see more use cases being requested for it, I'm sure will happen in the future.
Yeah, so just my 2 cents worth for your consideration is I think that you've provided people with a tool that they're going to be able to share some pretty impactful information with their various audiences. And the next question is going to be, how do I tie this to the business data? So as people start to use this, is probably, I would suspect you'll get that question. But yeah, thank you.
I told you, Bruce, this is a very sharp crowd.
Yeah, and
They are.
I love that question because we're actually
Yes.
already getting it from our more advanced customers, and so sometimes they'll say, "Hey, can you bring in customer success data?" Because we want to see what is the turnover of our customer support team negatively impacting our NPS score or our quality survey score for when we're answering customer support. Or we'll get people saying, "Hey, can you bring your Salesforce data?" Because we want to then track turnover, headcount to see how is that impacting sales. So we are getting that question. We don't get it from most, but we are getting it. And so basically what we do is we look at our most advanced customers and we look at them and say, okay, you're creating the roadmap for the rest of the customers. But timing is always so important because you don't want to build something that's so far ahead of what most people need that only a few people will use it. And so that's always the balance, trying to build which is one step ahead, not necessarily 5 steps ahead of the general market.
Great. Any other questions or feedback for Bruce? I do have one question, and then I'll let us all go here. I see a hand up, but unfortunately, Jen, I'm sorry, that's your hand up. Please unmute.
That's okay.
Go for
This
it.
might be a little out of context, but is there a way to auto publish data to, say, corporate dashboards or, you know, TV screens or kiosks that are in cafeterias and production areas and such?
Oh,
That is so interesting. So we actually just turned off our legacy dashboard, which was just a dashboard that you can view with a shared link. And so we actually have customers doing that. But what we found is that although the link can be shared, we didn't think that the link was as secure as it really needed to be, even though it was using a ridiculously long, ugly string. And so we said, instead, we need to really lock this down, especially for the request of larger customers, to just do SSO and then. But if you SSO'd a user to a dashboard and hooked it up to a screen, then, and that's the workaround that we're looking at now, in theory, that should work.
I'm going to ask Jen the question, are you using signage, as they say it these days, in the HR world to kind of market what's going on in the world of what is HR doing for the company? New hires and things like that. Perfect. Outstanding. I love it. I would say, Bruce, maybe, Jen, feel free to reach out to myself or Bruce, or I'll make sure they get in front of Bruce. I think people that are using that messaging situation are starting to recognize this is HR's attempt to start marketing, God forbid. What are we trying to do, and how successful are we? And I think it's an exceedingly exciting thing for HR to start considering. The data has to look good and it has to be true, but other than that, I mean, God forbid that HR is actually marketing what it's doing as opposed to other ways of marketing. Anyway, question for you, and this is kind of a long one for just a moment. You are sitting in a SaaS world. You are sitting on a whole bunch of data. Are you asking your customers as they're using your product, what are the most meaningful metrics are we looking at, and what are we doing at it? How much of an impact are these metrics making? In other words, in a sense, at the end of the day, Employee Cycles newsletter says the metrics to watch, i.e. my customers are doing these things with the metrics, and these are the ones they say are the top things to look for. It's kind of like a primer for the next person coming through. I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
Sure. And that's a pretty simple answer. Turnover, DEI, and recruiting. Very,
love it.
very hot. Where are we losing people? How are we losing them? How often? And what are the reasons? From a recruiting standpoint, are our recruiters actually doing their job? Are they really, if I'm being candid, some of it is kind of overwatch of, are they doing their job? Are they moving their candidates into the right stages at the right time? Not being lazy, skipping stages, hiring people too fast, but actually being diligent in the hiring process. And then from a DEI standpoint are we actually keeping people from different populations from churning or from leaving the organization? Are you promoting people? What does that people movement look like from a DEI standpoint so that you can be the most diverse, equitable, and inclusive company out there?
Outstanding. Well, we are at the hour. I want to say goodbye to everybody in the TRC. Bruce, I will say this is not goodbye, but adios for a little while. I will be au revoir, however you want to pronounce it. We're there. We'll be bringing you back. I have a feeling that you're going to be continuing to improve the product, and I like to bring people back to tell us what's going on. But again, thank you very, very much for an outstanding presentation, and thank you to the Technology Review Council again for the attendance and your support. So we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Thank you all very much.
Connect directly, please let me know. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Will do. Bye-bye.
All right.